All right. Well, we've been on a run recently of just loving albums, and Matt, let's see if we continue the streak.
I love albums and I love love, like Stevie Wonder.
Like Stevie, I love, love.
I love. All right, so Talking Heads. This is Fear of Music coming in at number 59 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums. Number 4 in 1979. Number 249 of all time. And I don't believe it made Rolling Stone's list. I took a look. I did not see it on there, so I'm going to go with no to Rolling Stone's list. It is Talking Heads' second highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. All right, so in the opening montage, you heard a clip from Heaven. Actually, I think I inverted that, but whatever. Well, the opening montage, you heard Heaven, and now you're going to hear a clip from Life During Wartime.
Heard of some great sights up by the highway, a place where nobody knows. The sound of gunfire off in the distance. I'm getting used to it now. Lived on a brownstone, lived in a ghetto. I've lived all over this town. This ain't no party, this ain't no disco, this ain't no fooling around. No time for dancing, more lovey-dovey. I ain't got time for that now. Transmit the message to the receiver. Hope for an answer someday.
All right, that's pretty apropos, isn't it? Life During Wartime.
Yeah.
So Fear of Music, so this album was recorded on, I think it was basically 2 days, April 22nd and May 6th, 1979, released on August 3rd, 1979. It's the third album by Talking Heads, and it's their second album with Brian Eno as a co-producer. The record reached number 21 in the United States and 33 in the UK, so it did pretty well. It had 3 singles, including Life During Wartime, I, Zimbra, and Cities. And this is really the third time we've been talking about Talking Heads. We've covered their debut album, Talking Heads 77, and what is it? More songs about food,
Buildings and food.
Buildings and food. There you go. So we did those and cold listens.
When people are so much involved in our show, like Brian Eno, do we need to start giving them like a sound when their name is invoked for the first time? Like,
Josh, you could do that Windows chime. Didn't Brian Eno compose the Windows chime?
Yeah, that's actually a fantastic idea right there. I was thinking, like, for some reason, when I think of, like, David Bowie, I think at the beginning of Sound and Vision, like, like that would be the sound, like, we talk Bowie. The Windows chime is brilliant, Matt. I just got to give you all the credit in the world for that.
He's all over the place. I mean,
yeah, he really is
all over the place. Not Bowie.
Including in space.
He is too, but
So, yeah. Yeah, so Brian Eno's here again, and I think he does their next album. He's in Remain in Light as well, which we're going to cover. That's from 1980.
Now, what's the number one highest rated album of theirs?
Oh, it's Remain in Light,
Oh.
and I think that's a pretty universally agreed upon statistic there. That's considered their best album.
It seemed like this album, not to jump.
We'll
too far
decide.
ahead, was also highly rated though.
Yeah, I mean, this is number 2, but I've seen other places like, more songs about, I don't know, cities and, I don't know, I can't remember that, but
Buildings
that
and
was
food.
that was on Rolling Stone's list, and this
Okay.
wasn't,
Gotcha.
so, anyway. So a little history on the Talking Heads. They were formed in 1973 by David Byrne and Chris France, who were both students who I think we talked about this before, at the Rhode Island School of Design, also known as RISD. And originally they were called the Artistics. And at the time, France's girlfriend, Tina Weymouth, would provide transportation for the band, driving from place to place. And they eventually, after about a year, they moved to New York City, decided to ditch the Artistics name and start to try to form another band. They couldn't find a bassist, so they had Weymouth join as the bass player, but not before David Byrne had her audition 3 separate times to make sure that she could make the cut.
Oh, artists.
Yeah. So they played their
That's
first
just
gig as...
comical to me on so many levels, which I'll talk to a bit later. But
Not Chris. We need to have her come in and play again. I need to do it again. Yeah. So they played their first gig as Talking Heads, opening for the Ramones at CBGB on June 5th, 1975. That had to be a cool show to see. Imagine that.
Yeah,
that would have been a fun
name
show.
checked in this album too. CBGBs.
Yes.
1, 2. Sorry. That's my Ramones soundbite right there.
1, 2, 3, 4. The name Talking Heads came from an issue of TV Guide which explained the term that was used by TV studios to describe a head and shoulder shot of a person talking. And the
Correct.
band was... What's that?
I said, yep, that's a TV term. Yep.
TV term, yep. The band was signed to Sire Records in November of 76, and in March of 1977, they added guitarist and keyboardist Jerry Harrison, who was formerly a member of what band?
The Modern Lovers?
You got it. Yep, Modern Lovers. And was it David Robinson, not the basketball player from the Modern Lovers, went on to play with the Cars. So
I think we made that joke in the Cars
we
episode,
did.
too.
I was
Yeah.
a recall back to that. Yes. So they released their first album, Talking Heads '77, in September of 1977, and that included their first charting single, Psycho Killer, which I'm sure many people have heard of many times before. And later on that year, Weymouth and France actually get married, and I think they're still married to this day. I didn't see anything about them getting divorced,
Nice.
so they're keeping it
A
going.
rare success story in the music world.
Seriously, and they're still alive, so even rarer.
Did he make her audition for the marriage, too? Or...
I don't think he's the one with the issue. It's just David Byrne.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So they teamed up for their second album with Brian Eno. With more songs about buildings and food, and that's the album that concluded a cover of Al Green's "Take Me to the River," and that's what gave the band their first top 30 hit. But after the success of that song, it wasn't all great. The band was, probably particularly David Byrne, was a little concerned that they might be kind of becoming a singles act, and they really didn't want to do that. They wanted to be more of an album-oriented or known for more than just having songs on the radio. So they wanted to expand upon what they called their subtly disguised disco rhythms that were present in more songs about buildings and food. And they wanted to make those sounds a little bit more prominent in the mixes of the new songs that they would do on this record. The initial studio recordings did not go too well, and they ended up recording most of these songs in Weymouth and Fran's apartment loft. They parked a van outside of the loft. They ran cables up through the window of the loft. And they recorded in their apartment. If you look that up in Wikipedia, where was it recorded? Chris Franz and Tina Weymouth's apartment loft. So there you go. And of course, Brian Eno was instrumental in helping to create the sound of the record, which I don't know about you guys, but I definitely heard that in several songs as well.
Were there oblique strategies employed for this album? Or
I
no?
didn't see anything about oblique strategies, but God, there had to be.
I
There
feel like
had to
David
be.
Byrne would really respond to it.
Or not. It's either one or the other. I'm not sure.
That's a good point. Maybe it depended on the oblique strategy that they were using. Yeah.
I mean, one could argue it's successful either way if you don't go with it.
That's true. It creates an angry response the other way.
Yeah.
And an energy.
Brian, man, he was a genius. So the songs on this record were a little bit more of a dystopian nature than the previous records. Weymouth was a bit skeptical of this, but Byrne kind of started asserting his role a little bit more, and he convinced her and the other band that this was the way to go. Harrison did the cover artwork, which is mainly black with some texture to make it look like a diamond plate metal flooring. And he also came up with the title of the album, but which he admitted was kind of ludicrous. But he also felt that it fit with the album's themes and reflected the stress and the pressure that the band felt while they were making the record itself.
Interesting.
There was a good description here. Fear of Music is largely built on an eclectic mix of disco rhythms, cinematic soundscapes, and conventional rock elements. And then there was this description or analysis from John Parales from Rolling Stone. He said that Fear of Music is often deliberately, brilliantly disorienting, like its black corrugated packaging, which resembles a manhole cover. The album is foreboding, inescapably urban, and obsessed with texture. So that's about it. There's not a ton of interesting facts I found about this record, but it's pretty highly regarded. And I think we are going to start with Josh is going to have to go this time. Josh, what did you think of Fear of Music?
Well, some of the things you said really struck a chord with me. My initial listen was through what this didn't grab me in the way that the first two albums did. But the more I listened to it, the more I liked it, to the point where I was playing songs on repeat, individual songs on repeat, because I liked things about them so much, like the track Animals specifically. That chorus just really fucking grabbed me for whatever reason. I feel like on some level this is like more complex Talking Heads, like a level up, more advanced studies Talking Heads, and I think that's what took me a while to get into it. It is like complex and disorienting at first. It and you said you mentioned the stress in recording the album. I felt that, after you said that, I can hear that in the album. It felt frantic at times. It felt aggressive. The guitar is kind of in different places, and I think Eno really has played a role I think Eno, more than the first two albums, I can see that influence in, because he goes like real abstract on, making airport sounds and stuff, that he can take it in a lot of directions. And I feel like he's stretched them in this album. There's unconventional rhythms again on this. There is that hallmark of the band that carries through here. I feel like the guitar is more prominent on this album, maybe. And just overall, it's a more complex album. I still really liked it. It's hard to imagine them being a singles band because their singles are not like really earworms necessarily. I mean, they're all very different and catchy, but the album as a whole is very it works together so well, I feel like. What else? The keyboards, there's some keyboard sound effects and weird stuff, and kind of vocal distortions that are played throughout the album, like on Mind. And it also feels like some of this has or could be sampled by rap artists, especially. It just seems like ripe for cherry picking different things from it. The percussion again is great. I think there's congos on I Zimbra. They still have that kind of marching tone as well, even though they're unconventional rhythms. It's just dancey in different parts. And I think overall, I need to listen to it more. I mean, I listen to this album more than I normally do for albums, and I still feel like I'm just starting to kind of grasp it. It is kind of abrasive at times. That was how I felt initially listening to it, but then I got into its rhythms, and I think I responded more. On something like Memories Can't Wait, that really kind of affected me. And again, like on Electric Guitar and Drugs, the final tracks, those are kind of out there as well. This is not, I can see this not appealing to everyone, I guess, ultimately. But I feel like there is stuff here. It's ripe for discovery and kind of meditating on it. And I mean, I've liked all the Talking Heads albums so far that we listened to, so I'm 3 for 3 on this. Ultimately, this is definitely probably like a more advanced version of Talking Heads, but I like what they're bringing to the table, and I like what Eno gave them as well.
Yeah, this was an interesting collection of thoughts for me as I was listening to this. Some notes I wanted to. Josh said some stuff I agree with, but I'll bring up some things that he didn't bring up. And Matt, you can certainly jump in too, because I don't want to steal too much of your thunder. But the danceability of this album really popped out. You can see kind of when they break off to do the Tom Tom Club, you can kind of see the beginning of the elements of where they were going with that, because it fits in the context of 1979, 78, the disco. It's not disco, but it could exist in a club that played disco, which I think is interesting, because the Talking Heads are certainly not a disco band, but it's sort of a testament to them that they could have a danceable album that could theoretically play in the same venue. I continue to be impressed by the evolution of David Byrne's vocals and singing, going from almost overpowering in Talking Heads 77 to the point where I sort of was like, if I could just excise that, this album would be better. To in more songs about buildings and food, I said it was kind of pushed to the back a little bit, and it worked for me. This could be the production. This could also be, I think, David Byrne figuring out how to integrate himself more. The David Byrne experience was the most pleasant of the 3 albums so far. I actually enjoyed the way he sang and his contribution. He wasn't as jarring to me as he was on some of the other albums. He fit into the music more. I think that's another observation I had is Eno has I don't know if I could describe why I know what a Brian Eno album sounds like, but there is a feel to a Brian Eno album where you're like, this feels like an album that could have been produced by Brian Eno, and not just the albums we've covered so far, but knowing, later the stuff he did for U2 and stuff, and even that Coldplay album, right? There is just sort of a hallmark to his sound. And I think one of the things is he is able to make art rock and interesting sound choices not sound as avant-garde as they are in some ways. He's able to congeal a sound that could probably be inaccessible into a kind of shockingly accessible palette. David Bowie has that gift too. That's why I'm not surprised those two spent so much time together, because they both kind of have that gift of I saw it with Bowie when he was doing the Iggy Pop stuff. He kept Iggy Pop's energy, but he kept it cleaner than the rawness of the earlier stuff. That was something here. I felt that he took the Talking Heads, and they didn't get less interesting than they were when they were sort of more art rocky. And I mean, they weren't avant-garde because they always had hooks and pop sensibility, but he was able to really refine that. And that's another thing I put. This is a very hooky album for the Talking Heads. It's got more identifiable hooks, both lyrically and musically. The album grew, I felt the album got better as it went along. At the beginning, like you, Josh, it wasn't quite grabbing me, but then as the album went on, I started to connect, and when I re-listened to it, I found bits and pieces. I want to keep going back to this, and I talked about this in an earlier episode. The bass is just so good on these albums, and that's why it's so funny to me that it's because it pops. It's really. The thing I noticed in these Talking Heads albums is I really like the bass lines. I said before, tasty bass lines, but they're tasty bass lines that I immediately connect to. And we're going to do another album in the next one that has a similar vibe that I'll talk about. But I really like the bass choices, and I like the fact that I could listen to the bass on its own, and it could be a prominent piece of it, but also it doesn't overpower it in the way that it screams, listen to my bass. It's just subtle enough to be there, but not so inconsequential that it doesn't add quite a bit to the album. So I definitely like I like all the Talking Heads albums in different ways. I don't know if I've gotten the perfect Talking Heads album yet, and Matt, we'll see if we keep building, because I feel like each of these albums is like 80% of the puzzle of what I want the perfect Talking Heads album to sound like. And if you shove sort of all of them together, it probably is 100%, but it'll be interesting to see if I find that album that's the 100%. But yeah, this is an easy recommend. I like this album a lot.
Well, if you're in line with what everybody else is in line with, then Remain in Light would I don't know. I don't want to put.
Have I ever been in line with what anybody else says? So we'll see.
No, but that's the one that's supposed to be it. So I like this album. I kind of agree with a lot of what you guys are saying. I think disappointment was a word that kind of came up, especially early on in the week, because I went into this going, I had high expectations, and I can't necessarily say that they were met with this, because I think that this, of the three, it seems like it's the more challenging of the three in terms of listening. I think that they're definitely, that whole idea that they're trying to, I don't know, be more arty, or be more, this is kind of the theme of this being more dystopian. I think you definitely can kind of feel that a little bit more. I mean, John, you're saying that there's hooks in here, and yeah, there are, but it's definitely it's a less poppy album to me by the same tone than the other two seem to be. And I know that was partially, something that they were trying to do, is trying to expand, which I certainly appreciate. But yeah, I think I might need some more listens to this. But there are some songs in here, like "Life During Wartime" that's a great song. I mean, and you're right, John. There's many danceable type things on here. And this is, you can kind of hear some of the disco. I don't think disco would have been a word that I would have said unless I read him say that. But after I read him saying that, I see what he's talking about. Like, I don't, disco not necessarily, but definitely dance music. Like I Zimbra is another one that kind of stands out. It's got this and that's based on African, beats and drums and stuff like that, which Byrne was very much into around this time.
Not just around this time.
Well, yeah.
In life.
Yes, exactly. He's doing the same stuff now. That's true. Cities, another song that's kind of like that. And I knew that. That's a song that Fish covers in their live set. So I was like, oh, this is a Talking Heads song.
Another Matt staple.
Yep. And so, and I will say that their version's very different. It's slowed down. So I didn't know that the original version was like that upbeat and fast. So it was it's
47 minutes long.
But, yes.
I think
it can be.
I think in Stop Making Sense also I heard that, and it's slowed down too in that.
Okay.
Or I've heard a version that's slowed down somewhere. I don't remember it being as fast as it is.
Fish definitely does it. I love Fish. It's a cool groove. It's different, but it was kind of cool hearing this, and that's kind of like this. It's weird to call that a dance song, but it kind of is. If you really listen to the beats and stuff like that, that's how you can dance to that, And then you've got a song like Heaven, which seems very out of place here. It's like the only real traditional song, I think, that's just a basic kind of ballad almost. And it's like more of a traditional structure. So, but I like that. It was a little bit of a palate cleanser towards the end. The song Drugs absolutely sounds like Brian Eno. It's like, holy crap. It's just, that could have fallen on that. What was the Brian Eno album that we covered? The Green
Couple.
Another Green World.
Another Green World. That seems
Here
like
Come the Warm Jets.
Yeah, Another Green World. That was the one that was a little bit more, I don't know, electronic or whatever. That didn't have a whole lot of lyrics.
Had a nature feel, I would say, is how I would describe that one.
Yeah, I think Drugs could have fit right on there. So, and then there's stuff like there's elements of songs like Animals and Memories Can't Wait and Air that I like, and then there's other parts that it's like, it's a little jarring, it's a little too outside the lines sometimes for me. So I can't say that I loved this record. It's definitely interesting, and I think I can, just even only listening to the other albums, once, I think listen to them once or twice, you can see them branching out, which I like. I don't know if I would say I would like this better than the other two. But maybe I need to listen to this more. So I'm a thumbs up on it. I mean, Talking Heads are a very creative band, very influential. They're interesting, right? You're not going to get bored listening to a Talking Heads album. And so I'm glad I got to listen to this. But I would say a little bit of a disappointment because I was just so high on the last two, and I was like, oh man, now it's really going to get good. And even like to this next level, and it didn't really get there for me. So in that sense, it was a little bit of a disappointment, but still a good album, I would say.
I didn't find this album that jarring, guys. I'll be honest.
Yeah?
I mean, there were parts that were not as pop-centered, maybe, as we'd say for the first two albums, but there weren't parts of this where I was like, oh boy, this is a hard listen, or abrasive to me. It was, it always stayed centered in there's an accessibility, I think, throughout this. And so even when they do stuff that's a little outside the box, it's not in a way that's, I find, like, challenging me in a way that's designed to make it hard for me to listen. I think there's always an open door.
Yeah. I think it just, in the realm of Talking Heads, it felt more abstract. Or
I mean, maybe because I know some of what Talking Heads become later, it didn't to me, because I think of them as being a band that doesn't color in the lines, and their first two albums colored in the lines a little bit more, certainly than this one, but and
I think that's kind of what I was in the comparison point to that. And it's, I mean, in no way is this the pop group, it's when I say jarring or like, it's not like, oh my god, like this is a very listenable album, but I'm just saying it's just one of those things where it's interesting, where there's parts of the songs that make you go, okay, I like this, and then they do something, it's like a note or like a little part that makes you go, I don't know if I would have if that's grabbing me as much, or maybe and so I guess jarring in that regard, because it's kind of, it's going in a different direction in the same song that you didn't expect it to, and it didn't really gravitate towards. So it's a little bit nitpicking, John, because I don't want to make it sound like, oh my gosh, this was totally hard to listen to. It's just that I found my level of enjoyment listening to the other two being higher than this, and I was hoping I was going to get more of that feeling here than I ended up doing.
Yeah, I might have been higher on this one than you guys were. I might put this as my favorite of the three.
Wow. I don't know. I'm still pretty high on this album. I just don't compared to the other two. I don't know.
And I would have it'd be interesting to have listened to this without listening to the other two.
Yeah.
Because I was definitely using those other two as a comparison point. So I still like it. I'm still thumbs up. I would listen, and I want to listen to this more to try to, because I think that this is something that could definitely grow, have some growers on it for sure. And I liked it more as the week went on, just in this week. So I think that.
I'll end with this so that we don't go too long. One thing I don't know if I need to compare to the others, because I like the idea that we've listened to 3 albums and each of them have had their own hallmarks. And that's something I really like about a band, that there's a commonality to a band, that I can recognize them and they're familiar and I like them, but never in a way where I feel like I'm either getting the same stuff or I'm getting such a deviation that it's like, oh, this is this band's creative album, where they're stretching in a way that it's like, they've kind of lost what makes them them, right? Like the Talking Heads, the experimentation never loses a piece of who they are, but they're creative without seeming like they're being contrived or, following a script, just, oh, now it's time for our creative album. Like they did that on this album, but it doesn't feel convoluted, if that makes sense. They went in a different direction, but it wasn't like, okay, now here's our dance album. They might have had an idea, but they integrated it in a way that was not, shoving a round hole into a square peg, and you recognize it.
Correct. I agree with that.
I do wonder also what percentage of bands that are going to be in our a decade end list involve Brian Eno. Is it going to be 25% or something?
Brian Eno.
Quite a bit.
Yeah, maybe he's all over the place. What's the percentage of bands that we
Bowie
covered
too.
that he's
Bowie
involved
probably
with?
is right up there with Eno, because he was a madman, and he was on coke. So it's like, Jesus, when you think about that, you're like, that's an incredible effort.
Yeah.
So,